I'm excited to be joined by one of the co-founders of The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn is streaming from Brazil. Thank you so much for joining us, Glenn. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited that you have once again taken over The Intercept's Facebook page. It sounds so aggressive and invasive, and yet so productive at the same time.
Absolutely. And again, listen, thanks so much for helping bring this together. I mean, this is actually your brainchild. We've been talking about it for a while. So the entire reason that I'm doing this with The Intercept, this takeover, is because of our conversation. So thanks to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled that you're able to do this.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of news that we could talk about, and we're going to get to probably two of the three things that I wanted to discuss with you. Ann Coulter at Berkeley, and President Obama's $400,000 speech. Let's just jump in right there. There's a lot of conversations. I honestly thought this would be over by now. I'm somewhat, and I mentioned to you, I'm agnostic about it. I see a lot of negatives about it. In some ways, it's just the system that bothers me more than the individual. I wanted to get your take. What is your take on President Obama giving a speech for Wall Street for $400,000?
So I think the interesting thing to ask is, why has it resonated so much? Why has this story endured for 3 or 4 days now with such intense emotions on all sides? And I don't think it has anything to do with anyone believing that President Obama himself has done something legally wrong or necessarily ethically or morally wrong. For better or worse, we live in an unrestrained system of capitalism. Wall Street is one of the most dominant factions in the United States. It has the ability legally to offer huge amounts of money to influential political figures, and President Obama has the legal right to accept that money. So that's not really the issue. I think the issue is the broader political points that it makes about our political culture and the Democratic Party. Obviously, it resonates because the issue of huge fees from Wall Street was a major issue as part of the Democratic primary because of Hillary Clinton and then into the general election. So I think it reinforces the notion that Democratic Party leaders are extremely close to and popular with Wall Street tycoons. I think it raises implications about the kind of democracy we live in, where our political leaders are able instantaneously to convert their political influence and political celebrity into massive personal enrichment. They're basically guaranteed of being multimillionaires worth hundreds of millions of dollars upon leaving office. Tony Blair did it. Ronald Reagan did it. Bill Clinton did it. Hillary Clinton did it. And now Obama is doing it. And so it's obviously a significant question in terms of what it means for our democracy when political leaders know they can be enriched by these factions. And then I think it has a lot to do as well with how the Democratic Party is perceived. The Democratic Party is wiped out on all political levels. A poll just showed that they are perceived as being more out of touch with ordinary citizens than either the Republican Party or Donald Trump, both of whom are perceived as out of touch, but not as out of touch with Democrats. Obviously, when you have the symbols of the Democratic Party, cavorting constantly with Wall Street, after spending years protecting Wall Street from prosecution and from populist outrage, making huge amounts of money for 40 minutes of work, more money than a lot of people make over a decade of work or longer, that raises real questions about what kind of party this is, to whom they're loyal, and whether or not they're going to be able to overcome the political collapse that has brought Donald Trump and huge numbers of right-wing Republicans into political office.
So to me, this is like the culmination of, and we'll be speaking with Thomas Frank later on in this episode. This is like the culmination for me of what the Democratic Party has been doing for the last 30 some odd years. They've been consistently moving to the right on economic policies. It was all the rave to back in the 90s and the early 2000s to say I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and this seems to be the world that the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, wanted to frame. And so to me, this isn't really a surprise so much as it is almost the final form, if you would, of the Democratic Party. Is it that we didn't notice this happening underneath us that surprises everyone, and now with this speech we are looking at it and saying, oh, something isn't right with the Democrats. The Democrats aren't really the party of the people. They're not populist, because this has consistently been moving in this direction for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly, I think it's the brazenness of it, right? Like, he's not even out of office 2 months or 3 months, and he's just running straight to Wall Street. Like, not even a pretense of separation, right? It's just this, like, almost this, like, indifference, like this defiance to what anyone thinks. On top of which, you know, he just got a $65 million publishing contract for the book that he and his wife both separately are going to write. So he's drowning in huge amounts of money already. So it's just kind of this, I think, attitude of, while you're all suffering, and while I presided over millions of foreclosures and protected Wall Street, I'm now going to go and enrich myself beyond anything that I remotely need, right in front of your faces, as flagrantly as possible. And then I think part of it is just that it's Obama who's doing it, as opposed to Hillary Clinton. I think people expect this from the Clintons. I mean, I expect it from all of them, but I think a lot of people expect it from the Clintons, but not from Obama, in part because if you look at the kind of thing that Obama said when he decided he was going to run for president, the critique that he made of the Clintons in 2007 and 2008, the condemnations that he issued about the political system was very much along the lines of, our politicians spend too much time with the rich people of this country, who exert way too much influence. When you hang out with them, when you become a part of them, you lose sight of the struggles of ordinary people. That's what happened to our leaders. And since he's left office, you know, he spent all of his time with billionaires on private islands in the Caribbean, signing $100 million, tens of millions of dollars of book deals, and now headed to Wall Street. I just think it's so contrary to everything he claimed he wanted to do as a public figure that for a lot of people, at least, it's shocking not to see a politician do it, but to see him doing it and doing it so brazenly. So
Glenn, now, granted, I'm doing this show because you put this together. I mean, for me, we worked on this, and I'm here. So, but, you know, I disagree with you a little bit here. And I know you're very, very good at that. So here's what I see. Is it the individual or is it the system? Because for me, Obama doing this is I'm completely indifferent to Obama doing this because I saw Obama for who he was in 2008. At November 24th, 2008 to be precise, when Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner were added to his cabinet. That's when I realized. So to see him do this, it's almost like I'm completely agnostic about it, but I do feel the same intense critique of the system that allows it that you're mentioning. So, but I want to feel from you, like, is it Obama? Is it the system, or you feel like we should really focus in on both?
You know, like I was saying, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. I look at Obama as a fairly standard issue Democratic Party leader or a fairly standard American politician. I don't see him in this exceptional light. I don't view him as standing outside of the system or in opposition to it for the reasons that you just said. I mean, not just Timothy Geithner and the way he reacted to the 2008 crisis by serving and prioritizing the interests of Wall Street over ordinary Americans, but as a person who was focused on civil liberties and foreign policy, to watch him early in 2009 defend most of the policies of Bush Cheney that people expected he would uproot, and to strengthen them and extend them. I've been well aware of what Barack Obama is for a long time. So for me, it makes no difference that he's doing it. It's not a surprise. I was just saying part of why I think it has resonated is because there still are a lot of people who view Obama as this kind of singular figure who is different than and in opposition to the kind of sleazy and legally corrupt components of our political culture. And they're seeing him now feeding at that trough the way that, you know, most other ordinary politicians do. And I think that for those people who see him that way, not me and not you, it's a little bit shocking. And that's why I think the story has resonated that way.
And I agree. I actually think that actually works well for those of us who have been trying to shine light on the fact that this system operates within a certain framework, regardless of who's in the White House, right? We're seeing this right now with the culmination of Donald Trump's first 100 days. He has flipped on so many policies. It's almost breathtaking to see how he's conforming to what we kind of call the deep state in many regards. But to double back, though, I heard you mention a couple of things that I've heard online in the Twitter space and the blogosphere, and actually there's an article by Matt Iglesias over at Vox that actually points out some of the same criticism that you have, surprisingly so, considering during the primaries, Matt Iglesias and Vox as a whole kind of protected Hillary Clinton from this exact criticism about taking this money from Wall Street. It's like they've seen the light all of a sudden. And a lot of people are seeing the light. I'm not going to, throw off on anyone who's coming to terms with the reality that President Obama is a part of this system. But it seems to me that, like, when people bring up the vacations that he takes, the fact that he hangs out with billionaires, and I've heard that a bunch of times in at least 20 different places since he was hanging out with Richard Branson, and I hear things about his book deal. I mean, my question would be on the flip side, like, well, what else is he supposed to do? Is he, he's not going to come and hang out with me. You're invited, President Obama, if you want, but he's not going to come and hang out with me. I mean, some of those critiques to me seem to go beyond critiquing the system and really go into critiquing the individual, which from my worldview, critiquing the individual never really shines a light on what we need to do to attack the system.
Right. See, so I don't see those as a critique of the individual. I don't really care at all who Barack Obama's friends are, especially once he leaves office. Maybe Richard Branson is a really engaging intellect and a really charming personality, and the Obamas just love his company and aren't hanging out with him because they like his private island and his massive yachts, but because they just really enjoy, the conversations that emerge when you sit with Richard Branson.
Right.
So that for me is not relevant, but what is relevant is that what we see, if you look at the model of how Washington was supposed to work is envisioned not just by the founders, but over the next couple of centuries in terms of what politicians were supposed to be. It was supposed to be these kind of citizen politicians who get plucked out of average life, do public service, and then return to average life, so that these are representatives of the people who are electing them. And what we have instead is the emergence of this very isolated, privileged, oligarchical political class, which really interacts with and serves the interest of the richest and most powerful. So when you see Obama immediately rushing out of the White House to a private island of Richard Branson or to New York and being at Cantor Fitzgerald as they pay him $400,000, it's not a critique of Barack Obama personally or his personal choices, which I don't think is really any of our business. I think instead it's just a very potent symbol of the people to whom our political class bears allegiance. And when you look at things like Brexit in the UK or the rise of right-wing nationalist groups in Europe or the election of Donald Trump, the root cause of it is a perception that the political establishment and the prevailing political order are completely indifferent to the needs and interests of the ordinary person, that instead they are only self-interested and serving the richest donors at the expense of everybody else. And so these kinds of symbols of Barack Obama, who rode in on a wave of populist anger at Washington, suddenly showing himself totally integrated socially and culturally and financially and personally into this very system that people hate, I think it just kind of is a strong political symbol about our culture and not anything specifically personally about him.
We have a couple of comments from Facebook, and we actually have a voicemail about this very issue. So let's take a look at these comments and give them some feedback. The first one is from Mary. She says on Facebook, the Democrats seem to have dropped their claim that Russia hacked the presidential election. Why? That's a little bit of a segue from where we are right now. You can address that if you want, but I actually want to go to any comments that we have on this particular topic, Max. And if we don't have any, I know we have a voicemail that called in. You want to take that now, or that probably would take us a little too far off track? It's on you.
Yeah, I'll defer to you as the person who has taken over the Facebook page. I don't want you taking over mine, so I'll let you.
Not a problem. All right, so let's get any questions or comments that are dealing with President Obama and the speech. Let's take a look at this next one. This is from Mahmoud. Glenn Greenwald, do you support measures to remove money from politics, i.e. turn over Citizens United? And if I can elaborate on that a little bit, Glenn, do you see this as a direct connection with the same fight as Citizens United?
So at the time the Citizens United decision came out, which was 7 years ago in 2010, I wrote an article essentially saying that my legal and my constitutional view is the same as the one that was expressed by the ACLU, with whom I'm generally in accord on First Amendment free speech issues, the same as labor unions such as the ACLU, which supported the Citizens United decision, as well as left-wing anti-Wall Street activists like Eliot Spitzer, which is that the way to take money out of politics, which I view as one of the 2 or 3 greatest domestic problems, the dominance of corporate money in politics, the way to do that is not by empowering the government to restrict political speech by telling a group of citizens like Citizens United, you're not allowed to spend money on a film about Hillary Clinton shortly before an election. The much better way to do it, both because that's unconstitutional and because it's dangerous to allow the government to do that, is through public financing of money. This is so much of a better way to take money out of politics. So if one candidate raises $10 million from corporate PACs, you have a program that publicly funds that candidate to ensure an equal playing field, so that if you want to have a well-financed campaign, you don't need to, as you now need to, go to corporations and serve their interests. You look for alternatives. For example, Bernie Sanders found an alternative way to finance his campaign. He was extremely competitive without turning to corporate money. So if you provide an alternative to corporate money to make sure that candidates can be competitive with the people who are being funded by corporations, that will take money out of politics without empowering the government to restrict political speech. And that, I think, is the vastly preferable way to do it. The problem is that there's huge opposition to public financing because the people who can implement public financing are the very people who are put into office by corporations that don't want the playing field.
Exactly.
Even. Right. And so that's been the problem.
Absolutely.
And let me just say one other thing about Citizens United, which is, way before 2010, the influence of corporate money in politics and the ability of politicians to get grotesquely enriched was almost unlimited. I mean, Bill Clinton made hundreds of millions of dollars giving speeches, so did Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. Corporations were dominant in our political process long before Citizens United, which was sort of a narrow issue. It did intensify the culture of money in politics, but I think it's a huge mistake to think about the world as pre-Citizens United and post-Citizens United, because post-Citizens United just accelerated what had already been this kind of oligarchical form of government. It didn't start it or initiate it or create it.
So I've actually seen this tied to the Barack Obama speech issue quite a few times, and I wanted to see, do you see this as as an extension of that, more of, I guess, the culture? And I think you spoke to that already, right? So this is almost indicative of the culture of corporate money in politics that goes above and beyond the Citizens United decision. Did I hear you correct?
Yeah, I mean, you referred earlier to your eye-opening of Barack Obama being 2008, when, in the wake of this Wall Street-caused financial crisis, he hired Tim Geithner, who then in turn hired a huge number of other Wall Street loyal servants to implement policies designed to protect Wall Street. That was 2008, 2009, before Citizens United. So, I think that it's a little bit, Citizens United has become this symbol. But I think that's all it is. It's just a symbol of what has been a very entrenched and well-developed trend for decades to ensure that our politics are dominated by corporate money.
I want to pull up a quote from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on this Barack Obama speech issue. And I found it interesting to see the difference in the language and some of the concern that's being floated by traditional Democrats. Here's the first quote on the screen here. It's from Elizabeth Warren. She said, "I was troubled by that in regards to the speech. I described it as a snake that slithers through Washington, and that it shows up in so many different ways here in Washington, as compared to Bernie Sanders, who said, he said, I think it's unfortunate that President Obama is doing this. Wall Street has incredible power, and I would have hoped that the president would have not given a speech like this." So you have the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, and you have the Elizabeth Warren, who is somewhere in the middle between Sanders and Clinton. But it seems like Elizabeth Warren had harsher words for President Obama, both of them clearly disagreeing with his decision to do this. What is your take on the division in the Democratic Party, or the left side of American politics, and how they're responding to this speech by President Obama?
I mean, I have to say, I found Elizabeth Warren's comments to be far more commendable than Sanders, and I have a lot of problems with Elizabeth Warren in the areas on which I focus: foreign policy, civil liberties. She's not very good. She's a very standard Democrat, often hawkish, doesn't have much of anything interesting to say about any of those issues. So I'm not a huge fan of Elizabeth Warren, but in this case, I have to say, in the areas on which she focuses, she often is outstanding, and this was a great case because not only was were her comments more kind of unflinching. And not only were they more systematic, like just more well thought through than Sanders, she also went first. Mm-hmm. She was the first one to denounce what Obama did, which makes it much harder. And what makes it most commendable of all is that she actually faces a pretty tough re-election fight in 2018. Yeah. Her seat is really not guaranteed. Her poll numbers are not great at all. Massachusetts, despite its reputation, can be a difficult state for Democrats. And it's very politically risky for a Democrat to explicitly condemn President Obama that way. Because for all his flaws, he's still wildly popular among the Democratic base, among the members of the Democratic Party. So I found what she did to be principled because there was no political benefit to her, but it's very consistent with her entire critique of the political process, which is that the political system as a whole, not the Republican Party, but the political system as a whole, both political parties have constituted themselves to be reliant on the same source of funding, which is corporate funding. And that as a result, they enact legislation designed to advance the interest of these small but very powerful factions that control Washington at the expense of everybody else. And that, as she said in these remarks, this is actually a threat to democracy. Because it is. Because if you have the federal government being controlled by the same set of private interests, regardless of the outcome of elections, you can vote for Republicans, you can vote for Democrats, the same lobbyists reign supreme, democracy is pretty illusory, and what you have instead is a plutocracy or an oligarchy. And that's what she was saying, that she was troubled by what Obama did, not because she's condemning Obama personally or cares how he makes his money, but because it's reflective of this pathology that is really systemic in Washington, that is not an ancillary issue. It's not like adjustable tax rates or modifying healthcare policy. It's existential to what democracy is, which is whether ordinary citizens actually can influence the policies and behavior of their government. And she's saying they can't, and the reason you can't is because the money that flows from these interests that's now flowing to President Obama is omnipotent. It cannot be defeated. And so I found her comments to be enlightening and also politically brave, because she's not only critiquing President Obama, she's critiquing the entire Democratic Party with those remarks as well. And that's the debate that the Democrats desperately need to have, but that they are trying to concoct every reason to avoid, Russia and Comey and all of these other things, because that is the question. How is the Democratic Party going to emerge from the collapse that it has suffered across the board without resolving the question of whether it's going to be the party of Wall Street and Silicon Valley and the plutocrats, or, on the other hand, the party of ordinary Americans and workers and the people who are suffering? And until it has that debate, I don't see any hope for the Democratic Party to improve, except by sheer luck, that Trump implodes, that the normal cycle of politics means that he loses in the midterm, but they're not going to do anything to help themselves. And it seems like self-critique is the thing that they want most to avoid.
Help me understand the difference, if you have a few more moments here, the difference between your position on Citizens United, matters of free speech, and the problem that existed before Citizens United, and the concern with the system that's operating as it does. This is what I think you and I definitely agree, that this is really just what America, neoliberalism, and Wall Street, they've collaborated together for years, and this is what they do. But in one hand, you seem to be more leaning towards more of a civil liberties position with regard to Citizens United. But then on the flip side, with President Obama and this particular issue, this is still corporate money being used as they see fit. It creates a problem very similar to the problem of Citizens United, at least in the progressive arguments. What would you see the difference between your position on Citizens United versus Obama getting this Wall Street money in this way?
Right. So for better or for worse, and I think it's for better, we have a constitution that guarantees the right of free speech. And I think it's extremely important not to start thinking about ways to erode or limit that right, because that is the bedrock right for all political activism. And so I don't think that there are legal or constitutional issues raised by President Obama accepting $400,000 or even $4 million checks from Wall Street in order to give speeches. I don't think it's a legal or a constitutional issue. You probably couldn't restrict that. without violating the constitutional rights of individuals. Once they leave office, the right to make money and to engage in private contracts. So then the question is, how do you create policies that ameliorate the effects of corporate money while at the same time protecting free speech? Well, you can tax the hell out of those kind of transactions so that income inequality is lessened.
Yeah.
You can punish politicians or political parties that do it. You can provide public financing so that corporate money loses its unique potency. That's what I think is where the solutions reside, not in eroding core political freedoms and empowering the government to restrict political speech, but in creating programs that lessen the harms or create alternatives and solutions to them.
Do you have a few more minutes? Because this conversation has gone for 3 days. Like you said, it's resonated in a way that I didn't expect. I expected to wake up the next day and it would be pretty much over. But some of the things that have jumped out, and I really wanted your input on it, is not only Obama in terms of his right to do this, and not only the effect that it has on the Democratic Party, but more specifically the appearance, right? A lot of people, that's the premise of Matt Iglesias' article, that it's the appearance of it that's problematic. In his case, he doesn't want to address the underlying neoliberal problems. At least that's not what I took from his article. In your case, you're saying, absolutely, let's address the underlying issues. But if it's a matter of appearance, I mean, who are we trying to make this look good for? I mean, there's going to be people who aren't going to like Obama whether he makes $10 or if he makes $100,000. You know, if it's a matter of making sure that people who have a problem with the Democratic Party right now don't see how they, get together with Wall Street, it's really like, who are we trying to please with appearances in this regard?
Well, I mean, political parties have to be concerned with persuading people that they deserve their support. Otherwise, those political parties won't win. I mean, appearances are everything in politics. So yes, there's a segment of the population that will hate Obama and that will hate Democrats no matter what they do. Conversely, there's a segment of the population that will love Obama and revere Obama and defend whatever it is he does. These are the two extremes of politics. As Donald Trump says, I could shoot people on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose my supporters. Right. The same is true of President Obama. And so you leave those two fringes or those two extremes to the side, and there's a huge group of people in the middle that sometimes will vote for Democrats and sometimes will vote for Republicans, dependent upon who they think will more improve their lives. That's why George Bush won in 2004, Barack Obama won in 2008 and 2012, and then Donald Trump won in 2016, because there are people who switch political allegiances, or they stay home or go to the polls based on how inspired they are by that particular political party. So when you have a party that is perceived to be the party of Wall Street, the party whose political leaders convert their political celebrity and political influence not for the greater good, but to enrich themselves through what to most people look to be really sleazy and I mean, imagine what it's like to be, like a single mother working 2 jobs who literally can't pay for health care for your children, to watch a politician who vowed to destroy income inequality and make your life better go to a Wall Street bank not 3 months out of office and get a check for $400,000 to speak for an hour. What do you think that says about the purpose of political leaders, the purpose of the Democratic Party, at a time when the Democratic Party is already viewed as wildly out of touch? So yes, there are some people who are impervious to facts, either because they will hate Obama or defend Obama no matter what he does, but there's a huge number of people whose behavior is influenced, and of course the Democrats have to be concerned about motivating and inspiring those people to vote for them, because that's why the Democrats have lost and the Republicans have won, because they haven't cared enough about those people and what they think.
Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, co-founder of The Intercept. Thanks so much for joining me. Thank you for your time today.
Have a great rest of the takeover, Benjamin. Thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure.